Beneath the largest hot desert on Earth, there's something that shouldn't exist. Rivers, not dry riverbeds baked into memory, but actual buried channels, some wide enough to be seen from space, carved by water that vanished thousands of years ago. And scattered along their ghostly paths lie the remains of cities. Cities that, by every modern assumption, had no business existing in the middle of one of the harshest environments on the planet. For decades, most people pictured the Sahara the way it looks today, an ocean of sand stretching to the horizon, empty, silent, unchanging. But that picture is wrong. Underneath those dunes is a hidden world, fossil rivers, dried lake beds, and the footprints of civilizations that engineered their way into one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth. Today, we're digging into how scientists uncovered that world, using satellites, radar, and old-fashioned archaeology, and how they connected the dots between a green Sahara, a mysterious desert people, and cities that seemed to appear from nowhere and then disappear just as fast. To understand how any of this makes sense, you first need to let go of what the Sahara looks like now. Geologically speaking, the Sahara as a true desert is relatively young, only a few thousand years old in its current form. Before that, it went through cycles, swinging between wet and dry phases tied to shifts in Earth's orbit and the strength of the African monsoon. The most recent wet phase is the one that matters most to this story. Roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, the region we call the Sahara was almost unrecognizable. Scientists call this the African humid period, though most people just call it the Green Sahara. Monsoon rains pushed much farther north than they do today, and the desert transformed into a mosaic of grasslands, seasonal lakes, and rivers. Crocodiles lived in what is now bone-dry Libya. Hippos wallowed in lakes across present-day Chad and Algeria. And we're not guessing about any of this. We know it because of the art people left behind. At sites like Tassili Najer in southeastern Algeria, thousands of rock paintings and engravings show a completely different world. Herds of cattle, swimming figures, giraffes, elephants, and antelope painted by people who lived alongside them. These aren't myths or symbolic drawings. They're a visual record, some of it dated back over 7,000 years, showing a Sahara that was, for a time, genuinely livable. But here's where the story takes its first real turn. This wasn't just wandering herders following the rain. In parts of the Green Sahara, people built something far more organized and far older than most people realize. In southern Egypt, near the site known as Nabta Playa, archaeologists uncovered a stone circle, a deliberate arrangement of megaliths, aligned with the summer solstice. Dated to around 6,000 years ago, some researchers argue it may be one of the earliest known astronomical calendar structures in the world, possibly predating Stonehenge by centuries. Whether it functioned exactly as a calendar in the way we understand the term is still debated among archaeologists, but what's not debated is this. The people who built it weren't primitive wanderers. They were organized enough to track seasonal cycles, build permanent monuments, and coordinate labor, all in the middle of what we now call a desert. So the Green Sahara wasn't just fertile. It was, for a window of human history, home to genuine complexity. And that raises an obvious question. What happened to it? The answer is climate, but not in the way you might expect. Around 5,000 years ago, the same orbital shifts that turned the Sahara green began reversing. The monsoon retreated south, rainfall dropped, lakes shrank, and over the course of centuries, not overnight, but not slowly enough for comfort either, the grasslands gave way to sand. Populations that had thrived on rain and rivers had two choices: migrate or adapt. Many moved toward reliable water sources, including the Nile Valley, a shift some researchers connect to the rise of early Egyptian civilization itself. But some people didn't leave, and that's where the story gets genuinely strange, because in the heart of what is now Libya, one civilization figured out how to keep an urban society alive inside a desert that had already swallowed everything else. They're called the Garamantes. For a long time, they were dismissed in ancient sources, mostly Greek and Roman writers, as a shadowy desert tribe, mentioned only in passing. Modern archaeology has completely rewritten that picture. Between roughly 500 BC and 700 AD, the Garamantes built a genuine state in the Fezzan region of the Libyan Sahara, centered on a capital called Garama. They had fortified towns, cemeteries with thousands of tombs, and trade connections stretching across the desert and into the Mediterranean world. Here's the twist. They were doing all of this in a place with almost no surface water. So how does a civilization sustain cities, farmland, and a growing population in the middle of true desert? The Garamantes engineered their way around the problem. They built an extensive underground irrigation system known as fogaras, gently sloped tunnels dug by hand that tapped into fossil water trapped in aquifers deep beneath the sand. This wasn't rainfall, it was ancient water, some of it left over from the wetter climate periods before, stored underground for thousands of years. By tunneling into these aquifers and channeling the water by gravity to their fields, the Garamantes turned patches of the Sahara into farmland, growing grain and supporting a population historians estimate may have reached into the tens of thousands at the civilization's height. It's a remarkable piece of ancient engineering, and also, in hindsight, a warning sign, because fossil water doesn't refill. The Garamantes were drawing down a savings account that nature had spent thousands of years filling, and nobody was making new deposits. Some researchers believe that as the water table dropped and the tunnels had to be dug deeper and deeper for diminishing returns, it became one of the pressures that eventually contributed to the civilization's decline. It's a debated point among historians, but the pattern, a desert society straining against its own water supply, is hard to ignore. For a long time, the Garamantes were the biggest confirmed proof that the Sahara had once supported real urban life. But the next major breakthrough didn't come from digging in the sand. It came from space. In the 1980s, NASA flew the Shuttle Imaging Radar experiments, instruments capable of penetrating dry sand and revealing what lay beneath it. When scientists analyzed the radar images over the eastern Sahara, something extraordinary showed up. The outlines of ancient river channels, completely invisible on the surface, buried under layers of sand that had accumulated over thousands of years. Researchers nicknamed them radar rivers. Some of these paleo channels appeared to be remnants of a vast, long-vanished drainage system, evidence that the eastern Sahara once had river networks far more extensive than anyone had documented from the ground alone. This changed everything about how scientists searched for lost settlements. If rivers had once carved through terrain that's now featureless sand, then the logical next question became obvious. Where there was water, there may have been people. Researchers began cross-referencing these radar-mapped paleo rivers with known archaeological sites, and the correlation was striking. Settlements didn't cluster randomly across the ancient Sahara. They clustered along the very rivers that radar had just revealed, rivers no living person had ever seen flow. Which brings us to the biggest reveal of this whole story, the one that ties every piece together. The Sahara we see today isn't the real Sahara. It's a mask, layered over a buried landscape of rivers, lakes, farmland, and cities that existed within a time frame that isn't ancient by geological standards, it's recent by human standards. We're not talking about a world that vanished before humans existed. We're talking about a green, livable Sahara that people walked through, painted, farmed, and built monuments in as recently as a few thousand years ago, well within the span of recorded human civilization elsewhere on Earth. The desertification that buried it wasn't a single catastrophic event. It was a slow, grinding climate shift, and it happened at a pace that outlasted the memory of the people living through it, generation by generation, until the green world their ancestors described started sounding like myth. And the truly unsettling part is that this process is still being mapped. Satellite radar, ground-penetrating survey work, and archaeological excavation continue to reveal new paleo channels and new settlement sites across the Sahara. Every few years, researchers report another piece of this buried puzzle, another Garamantian-era tunnel system, another dried lakebed with tools scattered across it, another engraving depicting animals that could never survive in the region today. What all of this tells us is something bigger than just Saharan history. It's a reminder that the landscapes we treat as permanent, deserts, coastlines, forests are really just a single frame in a much longer film. The Sahara has been green before, it's been buried before, and somewhere beneath the dunes, the outline of a river that once had a name is still waiting to be traced.